And of course, like I mentioned earlier, the push for the implementation of the two-thirds gender rule is set to be renewed today. And I mentioned that there's going to be a protest today or a demonstration by members of the civil society who are going to be marching through the streets of Nairobi from the Freedom Corner in Uhuru Park to Harambee Avenue to protest the delayed implementation of the two-thirds gender rule. We'll also be having a conversation in a matter of minutes here in studio. But let's just take a look at the journey of this two-thirds gender rule. It has been a big conversation here in the country for such a long time, but still it has not come to fruition. Let's just see why, the reasons why. Let's just cross over here to our graphics on the super wall. And yeah, so let's just take a look at where it all started. Article 26.6, Article 27 and Article 81B secure affirmative action aimed at reducing gender imbalances in the leadership. So these are the articles that are really meant to ensure that we don't have many members in regards to leadership positions being from the same gender. These positions by providing that no more than two-thirds of members in any elective or appointment position such shall be of the same gender. So these are the rules really that govern this particular principle in the Constitution. Let's just move over to the next graphics there. And we'll now take a look at the journey. And in 2010, during the promulgation of the Constitution, this is when that Article 81B of the Constitution actually came into effect with the promulgation of the Constitution. And then 2 years later, in 2012, the Supreme Court of Kenya directed the implementation to happen by August 2015, that in 3 years, the implementation would start. And in the same year, that 2015, where the Supreme Court had directed that that should happen, Parliament extended the timeline by 1 year. You'll remember that there was a push and pull in Parliament, which ended up giving another year before the implementation would actually take effect. That was in 2015. And then coming down to 2016, this is the time that two NGO, non-governmental organizations, moved to court to demand the implementation of the two-thirds gender rule. Let's now see what happened in 2017, if you remember. Moving on to the next graphics. Now, in 2017, the High Court directed the implementation to happen within 60 days. And this was last year. Remember, this is the time that there was already momentum with regard to the campaigns and the elections. And at this time, it could not happen because there was a lack of quorum. You'll remember even that it was a very big conversation as to just why this would not be done, and it's because there was no quorum at this time in 2017. And this, remember, is actually after the High Court had actually directed the implementation of the two-thirds gender principle in 60 days. That did not happen. All right, now let's just take a look at what we know about this principle. The Constitution of Kenya ushered in the new beginning of the women of Kenya by guaranteeing their right of participating in various political or leadership positions in democratic governance provisions such as Article 26, Article 27, and Article 81, which really secured the affirmative action aimed at reducing the number of gender imbalances in leadership, I beg your pardon, positions by providing that no more than two-thirds of the members of any elective or appointive positions such shall be of the same gender. So this is really where we are at. And today, like I mentioned, there's that protest which is going to be happening, and we'll be looking at that. Now, this constitutional quagmire was the subject matter of the Supreme Court advisory opinion of the 11th of December 2012, in which the court gave a specific timeline. Remember, I mentioned that it gave a specific timeline that by 2015, the date would be 27th of August, that this mechanism should be in place to actualize the not more than two-thirds gender principle. That did not happen, like I mentioned, and therefore there has been quite a number of push and pulls since that time when the Supreme Court of Kenya gave that direction. The Attorney General constituted a multi-sectoral technical working group to develop an affirmative action bill. However, by May 2015, these parallel processes had not resulted into legislation, forcing further court action, which resulted in a ruling from Justice Mumbi Ngugi directing that Parliament actually implement Parliament, the Attorney General and the CIC to have in place the legislation before August 2015 deadline. So that is really where we have been. We want now to have a conversation with regard to this protest that's going to be happening today, where we are at, where we are at. And I want to now join my guest here in studio, Mercy Jeruto. Thank you very much for joining us, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, and thank you for having me.
Great, karibu sana.
Asante sana.
So, of course, today there's that protest. Why now? Why now?
This has been necessitated by the fact that, as you can remember, just recently the president named his cabinet.
Right.
And out of the possible 22 slots, the president has allocated already 9 positions, leaving him with only 13 positions. So of these 13, women must be 9. 9 of them must be women. So this is what has necessitated or pushed us to just remind the country and remind the president in particular that we need to implement the 2/3 gender principle as is enshrined in our constitution. So it's on the basis of that that we saw that,
of the cabinet secretary's slots. But also, and we'll go back to that conversation. But just going back to the journey, it has been a long one. And just thinking about last year, 2017, when the High Court actually directed Parliament to implement it within 60 days, but that did not happen. Do you think really, even as we continue having this conversation, there is goodwill for this to happen?
Definitely. You know, you've laid the background very well. It's been a long journey, and clearly you can see that there is no goodwill, especially the political will. It's lacking from the executive, and it's also lacking with the legislature. You realize that the date that they were supposed to pass this legislation, there was actually lack of quorum.
Right.
No members showed up to debate this important matter. You know, we vowed to protect our constitution and ensure constitutionalism in our country, but just being treated to what the members of parliament are doing, I think it's quite unfortunate. And that's I think, a measure of how not committed this various organs are not in this issue.
Right. And to think that this is something that is enshrined in the Constitution, and when it comes to other things in the Constitution, we're very, members of Parliament are very aggressive and they're very passionate. But this particular one, like you mentioned, there seems to be, the goodwill seems to be lacking. What do you think is the main reason for this?
You know, there are many factors that explain this kind of reaction from our members of parliament, and one of them is the socialization. So there is a bit of cultural factors to this kind of influence, where they think that women are not as important, and where they think that the issue of 2/3 is not as important, that the issue of equal representation is not as important, that there are other matters that they think are more important than this. They've put economic argument to the reason why we can't implement this. We have countered that. We have done a research through the Institute of Economic Affairs, and we presented facts that actually adding more women is not going to really change our, our budgetary allocations. That is not going to cost us more, as what that has always been the premise to which they say that we can't implement this. So they seem to pick what they want. There are certain issues that they think they are more, that they endear more to them, and others that they neglect.
I like that you mentioned the fact, to do with, our culture. And, I was just reading a few articles related to this in the morning. And it seems that, because even leave Parliament alone. I mean, even coming to us as Kenyans, I mean, we have the opportunity to implement this in our own way, using our votes, but that does not happen most of the time. That's why we end up selecting more men, even when you have, a number of women who are qualified to actually run for these positions. So, do you think that we need an overhaul as to even how we think, even as Kenyans, leaving alone the political leadership?
Yeah, the fact is that women constitute 52% in this country. And of those 52, 48% are registered voters. But the way we've been socialized, Betty, is that I cannot view you as a leader. So when you offer yourself for, say, specifically, say, elective position, I will not vote for you because as Mercy, I'm socialized to believe that Betty cannot be a leader. So those are some of the things that influence voters when they're making this decision. So women will tend to think that men make better leaders than women, so they vote for the men and then just leave women to be by the side. So that's why I say there are many factors that account for this kind of, the quagmire that we are in. And one of them is cultural. And that's why in our constitution it was written clearly that the state had to take legislative measure. That's an appreciation of the factors, of these cultural factors that maybe can't be sorted then by law.
That should have come to clear or to fill the gap.
As we work on, changing the behaviors of people. Yes, that will take time.
It will take time, but that's why the Constitution gave this legislative platform. All right, so we'll continue with the conversation in a few minutes, but I just want us to cross over and focus on another developing story. Like I mentioned, the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions is today embarking on a week-long exercise that will see it review pending files at the Nairobi Remand Prison. The case review exercise will run up to Thursday this week and is aimed at ascertaining causes of delay in cases and identifying those that can be expedited. All right, so we'll go back there once the Director of Public Prosecutions begins making his remarks. But as we wait for that, let's continue with our conversation here. Remember, I'm speaking to Mercy Jeruto, who is a Governance and Leadership Officer at the Center for Rights Education and Awareness. So let's go back to the conversation. And you said that, of course, the Constitution was supposed to come in and fill in that gap. Now, there's another conversation that, that people who are questioning, was the Constitution very clear in the how to actually go about this, like giving practical and extremely simple ways of how to attain the 2/3 gender balance?
The Constitution cannot do that. The Constitution gives general principles, which subsequently should be legislated by the members of Parliament. So it cannot go as to how, contrary to what it did for Article 117 with regards to the composition of county assembly. Remember, we do not have this problem at the county level. It's only at the national level. And the discussion there, then was that we expected the National Assembly to sit down and give us a mechanism. Actually, what we're asking is just a mechanism to effect that provision in the Constitution. Because of the varied reasons and some of the limitation, it was expected that this matter ought to have been given more time, more weight. So that power was given to Parliament to legislate for a mechanism. But this does not mean that it was not. In the first draft of the Constitution, this was clearly stipulated how we were to achieve this. But the members sitting in Naivasha thought that this was not the way, that this matter ought to have been subjected to more participation, and hence the clause providing for its realization was removed. And then the powers were given to Parliament to ensure that a mechanism that is more representative was identified.
All right.
Yes, and that's...
I also want to look at it from a positive perspective. I mean, even from the last election, we have quite a number of women who were elected, including governors. Do you think, maybe we're making strides, very slow, but at least we're heading somewhere with, even trusting women with these positions?
Of course, we are making strides, albeit in fits and starts. Yeah, we are making, and I believe it's been the work of maybe civil society, a number of goodwill politicians as well in the House. Yeah, so we are making the progress, but not at the rate in which we think we deserve.
All right.
Yeah.
What do you think would be the impact of having this gender rule implemented successfully?
Definitely, one of the impact is that we'll be adhering to the Constitution. The Constitution is very clear that, please, these are the provisions that for far too long there are certain group of people in our communities that have been marginalized in our political processes, in our leadership position. So we need to ensure that these women, not just women, also the other minority groups, including ethnic groups, people living with disability, that we need to include them in our governance and leadership processes. So And I think for me, once we are able to implement that, then at least we will be saying that this country adheres to the provisions of the Constitution.
All
So
right.
to me, that is the greatest impact of implementing the two-thirds.
The reason I ask it this question, I'm asking you that question of, just what really would be the impact of having more women, seeking leadership or actually taking up leadership positions, is that there has been a conversation to do with, why won't women go out and fight competitively for these seats? And the other conversation has been that, it's never a level playing ground when it comes to women, in politics. So are we likely to see, what is your take really when it comes to that conversation about women being able to fight for themselves?
I think women, they have to be included because, Betty, I think to use the analogy of the former president of the US, Barack Obama, that if we are in a football match, we have to allow the other half of the team to participate. So women bring an alternative voice to our leadership position. They make us, alive to certain factors that maybe perhaps men might have overlooked. So to that effect, I think the involvement of women in our various processes, not only political, even non-political seat, is very important and very crucial. Yeah.
Let's go back to that conversation to do with the cabinet positions, and that's the reason why we are having this protest today, to try and agitate for more women to be given or appointed as cabinet secretaries. What is your take about the women who were there previously holding different cabinet secretaries slots? Do you think that they were able to, to live up to the expectations that Kenyans had to warrant that, 9 other women would be selected to spearhead some of these ministries?
But why do we keep subjecting women to different measure? I keep saying this to my colleagues in my office, that if we are to line up 10 of the worst performing cabinet secretary and just put one woman as a worst performing woman cabinet secretary, she will emerge the winner in this list of losers, of least performing. And if we want
she'll still be at the top.
She will be at the top. And if we are to line up best performing men and just include one best performing woman, that woman will emerge as a leader. Because the measurement that we use, we tend to have higher standards for women when we come to assess their ability to deliver, their inability to work. We tend to assess women differently. The fact is that these cabinet secretaries, there are quite a number of them that did not perform. And yet maybe some argue that they have already been shortlisted. When you look at the president list, he has shortlisted some that people arguably say that have not performed. Yeah, so how come those ones merited to get into the list and not the women?
But now that we are here and we're looking at the next set of, the cabinet secretaries who will be, brought out by the president. The reason I'm asking this is that even as we agitate for more women to take up these positions, the ones who have been given the opportunity so far, I mean, of course we will talk about the men, but now because we're trying to have a conversation about, women taking up these positions, do you think they were able to rise up to the expectations that Kenyans had?
Yeah, personally, I think if you look at Cabinet Secretary Amina Mohamed, I think she has performed exemplary. When you look at what Judy Wakungu is also doing, I think those women are examples of why we want this space. So if we can use examples of the few that get into leadership, and bear in mind that there are certain also factors that still impede their performance. They have to deal with other issues that are still present in their working environment. So we just have to be alive to this fact. These are two arguments that we tend to mix. There's one argument is that we need women in leadership position. And then there's another argument that these women need to perform. But we must first get them into the leadership position. We are stuck at the point of bringing them into this leadership position. We will, as Center for Rights, Education and Awareness, keep asking these women that then get into this leadership position that they must, perform. So we'll keep watching on them to ensure that they perform. We are just not asking for their inclusion for the sake of their inclusion, but it is our realization that when women are included in leadership position, they bring an alternative perspective that is much needed. Since independence, since 1963, this country has just been electing men, and men have been occupied a majority of leadership position. How come that the country has never questioned or come to the realization that what if we did what we've been doing differently? What if a majority of the people that we give leadership position are women? Can we see a difference? Because you can clearly see the issues happening at KNH, the poverty levels in this country, the levels of uneducation in our country. So it means that we have been stuck, and we are stuck because we've been doing the same thing in the same manner. So can we try and do these things a little bit different and see whether change will come?
All right. What is the importance of implementation of this principle with regard to Uhuru Kenyatta and the legacy that he says he wants to leave even as he exits at the end of his term?
You know, when Jubilee came into power, when you looked in their first manifesto, they were very clear that they were going to include women. And for us, sitting where we sit, we thought that this government actually was going to ensure that the implementation, just remember, they came right in 2013, immediately when we were still on this issue of two-thirds. It was just immediately after the Supreme Court had given its advisory, and we saw some ray of hope in the election of the Jubilee administration. And we then thought that this was going to be a walk in the park, and finally the women of Kenya are going to realize what they've been asking for far too long. But subsequently, and it's out there, you saw that, even this cabinet that has just, that is vacating office was short of the two-thirds. So we cannot say that there was good political will or enough political will from the Jubilee administration. And I think if we are talking about matter of legacy, there can be no better legacy than the legacy that promotes and include a majority, not just a majority, that ensures that our governance and leadership structure is as inclusive as possible, and it represents the face of this country.
All right.
I think that's a better legacy for
any
leader to
for
have.
any leader.
Yeah.
All right. So apart from the cabinet slots, how are we looking to, or even how are you looking, as Curl, to, of course, forward this conversation so that even if we get the 9 slots, for the cabinet secretaries, that also moving forward we have, more women being considered for leadership positions?
There is the phrase people saying, perfecting your country. So this is not a game in it, an end in itself. It's a means to an end. Once we are able to get a number of women into leadership position, then we move to the next big question in the room, which will be the performance of these big women. So it is a continuous process that we'll keep working hard towards perfecting our country and ensuring that we reach at a stage where our country is developed, maybe, to put it in a nutshell. Yeah. All
right. Thank you very much. I've been speaking to Mercy Jeruto, who is a Governance and Leadership Officer at the Center for Rights Education and Awareness. Mercy Jelimo.
Right.
All right. So you will be having the protest today?
Yes. Later on, we'll be having the protest. We are petitioning the president and also just reminding them that we have this issue of two-thirds on the table. First and foremost, we are asking him that of the 13 slots that he has to fill, 9 should go to women. We are categorical on that of those 9 slots are meant for women, if he has to adhere to what our constitution says. And then secondly, we want to remind the Parliament that it is high time they enact a legislation to implement the two-thirds principle as enshrined in the Constitution.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.